Hello, I'm Lucy Hockings. From the BBC World Service, this is The Global Story. Just over a year ago, a devastating crash involving 3 trains killed nearly 300 people and injured more than 800 in India's eastern Odisha state. It was one of the deadliest train crashes in history. But this isn't the only deadly crash to happen on Indian railways, one of the largest railway networks in the world. Today we're going to look at why so many train crashes happen in India. Could anything have been done to prevent the devastating crash in Odisha? And what are we doing around the world to make sure our rail networks are safe? With me today, sitting opposite me in our studio in London, is Alessandra Bonamolo, the director of a new BBC documentary about last year's collision called Why Trains Crash. Hi, Alessandra.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you for having me.
And also in Delhi is BBC India correspondent Shotak Biswas. Hi, Shotak.
Hello, Lizzie. Good to be on the programme.
Alessandra, can we go back to June 23? I remember seeing the first bit of wire copy coming in about this train crash and thinking how horrific it was. But nothing quite prepared us for the first pictures, for those 3 trains, the mangled wreckage that was so horrific, it seemed so huge when this happened. Explain what we know about what caused what happened in this crash.
On the 2nd of June last year, a Coromandel Express, a train that is very widely used in India that travels along the east coast of the country, was travelling across the state of Odisha and about to pass a small station. Up ahead, there was a goods train that had been taken into a side track to allow the high-speed train to travel on the main track. So what happened is that the Coromandel Express received a green light proceeding along the main track. But what it didn't know is that the points on the track had not moved to keep it on the main line. So that means that the Coromandel that was travelling at 80 miles per hour, around 130 kilometres per hour, ended up hitting the goods train and derailed as a result. Now, to make matters worse, there was another passenger train that was travelling at high speed in the opposite direction. And when the Coromandel derailed, its carriages flew across the tracks and hit the third train coming in. For people who arrived first on the scene, who were the villagers living locally, they were confronted with horrific scenes.
I know that you spoke to a lot of eyewitnesses, including former Indian Army officer Deepak Behra. He was close to the station when the disaster struck.
I suddenly heard sound kind of a boom. Along with that, a screeching sound. So we started running to the train accident site. The situation was beyond, imagination.
This crash happened in quite a remote area, so there must have been lots of locals around at the time before any other help arrived.
It really was a huge community effort because it took about an hour before professional help, before the emergency teams could arrive on the scene and really tend to the injured. There was one pharmacist who had a pharmacy nearby, and he found that he really had hundreds of people who were injured and bleeding, and he treated them as much as he could. But at some point he ran out of medicine, and he was very complicated to get more supplies back because the roads were blocked clearly by the emergency services who was trying to reach to the area.
शाम को जो मैं हादसा देखा तो मैं लाइफ में ना करूँगी ये चीज़ मैं दिखने भी नहीं चाहूँगा. मैं देखा कि कुछ लोग मतलब 150 से 200 लोग उधर से भाग के आ रहे थे. उनका हालत ऐसा था ना आप डर जाएंगे उसको सोचेंगे भी मैं उस दिन अकेला था दुकान पे तो मैं बहुत डर गया था उस दिन. जल्दी हो सके क्योंकि हमको लोगों को बचाना है. लोग हमारे सामने ही मर रहे थे, हम देख रहे थे क्योंकि हमारे पास और कुछ चीज भी नहीं था.
What a remarkable man that pharmacist was. Shotak, you've been covering the Indian railways for years and lots of other crashes as well in your time as a journalist. When you first heard about this particular crash, what struck you?
The last 30 years, we've had about 7 deadly crashes, right? 5 of which I think took more than 200 lives. And the worst was one in 1995, which took 358 lives. We had seen a decrease in the number of large accidents. We've had derailments, we've had small kind of accidents, but not at this scale. I remember when I was like in college and I was like in the 90s and 80s, there would be a couple of huge accidents every year. It was like that, 200, 300 people would die. And that was not the case. So when this happened and the news started coming in, I remember the first flash was about 60, 70 people might have died. I thought, oh my God, this looks serious, because I remember how the toll goes up very, very quickly. I think between the two trains, they were carrying some 3,000 passengers. So you can imagine, I immediately knew that this was a fairly deadly crash.
Now, Alexandra, as part of the documentary, you did speak to people who survived. I mean, Shotak's saying there were a few thousand people on that train. So there were many that did actually make it. What did they say?
They described a situation when suddenly they found themselves in this complete darkness, not understanding what had happened. But the reason they say they managed to survive is because at the time of the crash, they were hanging onto some rails and they did not let go.
আমাদের বগিটা দুখানা হয়ে গেল। দেখছি আমি চাপা পড়ে আছি, পা আটকে গেছে, মাথা ছড়ে গেছে। এবার যারা পাশের সিটে ছিল ওরা সব মারা গেছে।
It was extremely difficult for them to get out of the wreckage, but when they did finally manage to do so, they realized that the people they were traveling with, the family, the friends, were not with them.
Shotak, I spent 4 months travelling around India, and I didn't get a plane. I don't even think I got a bus, maybe a few local buses. I went everywhere on the train because that's what you do when you're in India. It's kind of hard to appreciate just how important the railways are in India unless you've been there and experienced it. But explain to us what the rail network means to Indians and how it's helped shape the country.
If you just look at the railways, the Indian Railways is one of the biggest employers in the world, actually. It's got over 1 million employees, 1.2 million to be precise. They're adding kind of 5,000 kilometers of tracks every year. So the scale is completely gigantic, because railways is really, it's just not just traveling in a train. They're very long journeys, sometimes from one end of the country to another. People make friends, people bring food, people share food. So it's much more. It's kind of a microcosm of India. A lot of people say that if you haven't traveled on railways in India, you really haven't seen the real India in a sense.
I mean, I'm smiling as you say that because that was so much my experience, that I talked to people I otherwise wouldn't have. I shared food with people. We had chai. You look out the window at the most beautiful scenery going by. It's an extraordinary experience being on the Indian railways, because you do have that sense that the whole country, you're experiencing the whole country, but on this one train. And that's something, the spirit of the railways, Alexandra, that you really try to show people in the documentary. It must be something you've felt as well.
Absolutely. And this train that we are talking about, the Coromandel Express, like many others, travel for many hours, 25 hours roughly. So the landscape changes as you look out of the window. So it is, as you say, it's just an incredible experience. And as one of our contributors said, they also are very much part of the fabric of the country, and they're really important for national identity and a source of national pride.
The spirit of India is to travel, is to move, and you can see the country change when you travel on the railways. They're one of the largest railway networks on the planet.
Yeah, Alexandra, and the people that you were speaking to, the many professionals who work on the rail network, what was their perspective about how safe it actually was to travel, and what were their concerns?
The railway network in India is vast, and it was also built more than 100 years ago. So we're talking about a network like in many other countries. They need constant repair, constant upgrading. And yes, over the last 10, 20 years, there have been investments and improvements. The number of derailments have gone drastically down. It was 20 years ago 282, and now is around 26 for the last recorded figures. But challenges still remain.
Shautak, having watched many Indian trains in the time that I was there, but also since, one of the big images that you often have is people hanging off them, people sitting on top of them. It's hard not to believe that overcrowding mustn't be a big problem on these trains as well.
Yeah, overcrowding is a problem, especially on unreserved coaches. People sitting on top of trains I've seen in my childhood, and I don't see people sitting on top of trains anymore for a long, long time. But yes, there's a massive amount of overcrowding because it's the most affordable transport in a very vast country. There's vast amount of migrations. More than 250 million Indians migrate within the country every year, within the country. And for a lot of them, the train is the main transport, right? And so we are seeing a lot of blue-collar migration on trains, and consequently, we are seeing a lot of crowding.
Alessandra, there's been a big investigation into the Odisha crash. What did it find?
Well, Indian authorities have not disclosed details of the investigation so far, but a report does exist, as confirmed by the Railway Minister, and we did find a leaked document which claims to be the report produced 4 weeks after the disaster, which we verified with our sources. So the document says that on the day of the crash, a maintenance team was doing work on the barriers at the level crossing and wiring it up to the relay room. What they found, they noticed that some wires were plugged in an unusual manner, and instead of reporting it to more senior engineers, they went ahead, not realising that what they actually were doing was miswiring the circuits. Now, the situation is more complex than that, because there was another maintenance team that worked in the same relay room in the same area. And they had done an unorthodox repair, leaving no proper records of it. So this chain of events ultimately resulted in the points on the track not switching back to the main line, which is the line the Coromandel Express was travelling in, and ultimately leading to this 3 trains crash.
So the derailment didn't happen until after the collision, according to this leaked report. But Shautak, you've been looking into derailments particularly and some of the problems that the train system has. What is the data showing us about derailments?
I remember accessing a government safety report from 2019, I think, or 2020, and they found that derailments were responsible for about 70% of the railway accidents. And, Indian railway workers are expert, but they've been doing this forever, maintaining railway tracks for a while. So it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's just that there are failures, and when there are failures, the results are catastrophic.
And it's such a vast scale, this massive network, thousands of kilometres of track, billions of people travelling. So we should actually say that accidents like this are quite rare. Nonetheless, Shautak, you were saying throughout your life, ministers resign when there's a big accident. So there is pressure on them to reduce the fact that there is any kind of margin of error. I mean, what particular measures are being taken to keep people safe?
One of the main things that is happening now is they're putting anti-collision devices. What the system does is the 2 drivers, if they're on the same track or if they're in proximity, they get alerted that there is a train in a certain proximity, just like airline pilots do when they're sitting in cockpits. So that's something which the government has been investing on. As far as the maintenance is concerned, I think what is happening in India is, this is a problem with really a lot of things in India, because India is aiming to become 3rd largest economy in the world. So they're they're trying to make the trains faster. They're trying to make the track, there's a bullet train corridor coming up between Delhi and Ahmedabad. So there's a lot of criticism that whether we need to strengthen our basics first and do all this.
Alessandra, back in Odisha, all these months later, families must still be dealing with the devastating impact of what happened. What sort of things have they been telling your team?
Some of them had life-changing injuries. Obviously, they're still dealing with an awful lot of trauma. They were just going about their day. They were just going to work, finding better opportunities. And now some of them are not able to travel anymore. The circumstances of the families have changed. They lost an income in some cases. They need more support. to be able to go about their lives. But at the end of the day, there's still hope to be able to go back on a train and go out to find better opportunities, another job to sustain themselves and their families.
Sholto, people want to be safe when they travel, obviously. And when you talked about your childhood and trains and your experiences, you almost seem quite sentimental. And I suspect a lot of Indians feel the same way, that there is a huge connection to the trains and to the rail network.
You grow up looking at these accidents and reading about these accidents and watching these accidents on TV. Even as a reporter, I never covered an accident up close and personal, but one of my closest colleagues, a photographer for a national news magazine, about 20 years ago, he was coming to Delhi from Calcutta, and his 133 people died in a train crash. And he was in an air-conditioned compartment. He miraculously survived. And I remember him telling me that, he had met a Sikh couple at the Calcutta railway station before boarding the train, and they'd become friends. And the next thing is at 1:30 in the morning, he comes out from the top of the train through an opening, and he sees, as dawn breaks, he sees that this man sitting near the railway track with his dead wife at his feet. And that I could never forget when he told me that. So I think all those sentimental memories turned into something very dark and morbid when I heard that story. And that's the story, what happens when a train crash happens.
Sholto, thank you so much. Good to see you in Delhi.
Thank you so much. Good to be on the program.
Alessandra, lovely to have you with us here in the studio.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Thank you for watching. If you want more episodes of The Global Story, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We do love to hear from you as well, so don't forget you can send us your comments. Just leave them in the comments section below. Thanks so much for watching.